Grab your coffee. Today we're going to be answering all of your questions. So on my channel, I get a lot of questions, a lot of questions regarding Florida real estate and everything that pertains to that. So in today's video, I took several of the questions that I have received in the past couple months that were asked more than once. So these are going to be questions about closing costs in Florida and how it works if you're a snowbird and how does some of the rental restrictions work. Just many of the things that you might want to pick up the phone and ask someone, but you're not sure who to call or who's going to answer you honestly or who's even going to give you the right information. So in today's video, I'm going to try to get you on the right path regarding many of your questions. Like I said, these questions all came to me from my real estate community here on YouTube. So this might even be something that you've asked along the way. Now listen, before we jump into this, if you have something that you want to talk about particular to your situation, maybe you're having trouble navigating the whole move from Michigan to Florida. Maybe you're not sure how to time that correctly. Maybe you're having a challenge with something you're working on in terms of how to get a particular property financed. Any of those questions that are very specific to you, if you're interested, I'm happy to have a conversation with you. Book some time with me down below in the description box. We can do a phone call. We can do a Zoom call. I'm happy to try to work you through that process. We do this all week long, so I'm happy to dive into your particular situation. We have a lot of people that are trying to navigate their move to Florida, and maybe you're not ready to even think about doing it for another 3 to 5 years, but you want to get prepared ahead of it and know what you should be doing in the meantime so you can hit the ground running. So we can definitely help you with that. Down below, just book some time with me. This one is really common. Are closing costs higher in Florida? And the short answer to that is yes, they are. And the reason for that is that Florida has some fees that many other states don't have. One of them in particular is the dock stamp fee that you pay on a lien, on a mortgage. So county to county, that can change regarding who pays that, the buyer or the seller. And it can even vary contract to contract. So that's the reason that I always say, do not bring your buddy from New York who's done a lot of deals for you up in New York, but they never do deals in Florida, or maybe they never do deals in the county in Florida where you're looking. So for example, Collier County to Lee County, who pays that dock stamp fee, which can be at 35 cents per $100, it can be thousands and thousands of dollars. It could be $4,000, $6,000, $8,000. It really depends how much you're financing. So that's not the time to bring your buddy, because if they get that wrong, you will be ill prepared and they will be completely shocked when your closing costs are way different than when they balance with the title company. So the short answer is yes. The closing costs are higher, and that's one of those things that you don't want to get that wrong. You definitely want to be reviewing all the fees and make sure you're working with a lender who knows the county you're buying in. Can the seller contribute to closing costs? The answer to that is yes. Almost across the board. I really can't think of a situation where a seller couldn't contribute to closing costs. But for most standard typical loans, yeah, absolutely, you can ask the seller to pay closing costs. Now, is that typical? Not in a second home market. It isn't, because generally speaking, somebody that's buying in a second home market is putting down, they're doing a conventional loan, putting down at least 20%. So it really comes off a little odd in your negotiations if you have to ask for closing costs on top of that. And I use the word have to. I understand that some people just want to do it, but think that through before you do it. If you ask for $10,000 in closing costs, you are essentially financing that back in. So if you're doing a loan at 7.5% interest and you ask the seller to pay $10,000 in closing costs, in their mind, they're working off a net. So they're going to say, okay, well, I'm going to bump my counter a little bit higher because they asked me for $10,000 in closing costs. So ultimately, they're going to ask you to give it to them to give it back to you. So you're financing your own closing costs for the next potentially 30 years. So I would think through that before you do that. But if you're an FHA or a VA buyer and you're not super cash heavy, you're going in with very little or no money down, then you may want to go ahead and bite the bullet and ask for the closing costs. Who pays commission now? Good question. Good question. Buyer or seller. The seller can choose to pay the commission. The buyer can pay the commission. It's different right now. It's changing. Our changes are supposed to occur in August. And for us as real estate agents, what that means is there's going to be no commission announced in the MLS system. So when we pull property, so if you're, Joe and Marie Smith, and you come to me and you want me to find you a $400,000 house in Sarasota, and you give me all your guidelines and I put it in the MLS and I find a whole list of homes that I think could work for you. What it used to say was buyer's agent commission X, whatever X is, and X could be anything that the seller chose to put in there. Now, there was a little bit of what was deemed to be standardizing a little bit, but, we're not going to have that conversation because eggs have a typical price. That's just normal. You could go to different grocery stores and the price is going to be a little bit different everywhere you go, but they are a wee bit standardized. We had a little bit of that with real estate as well. So I'm going to make up a number. Let's say that in the MLS, it said seller will pay 2.5% to a buyer's agent. So you as the buyer didn't pay that. That was part of what the seller deemed to be market price in their home and their typical fees that they're going to pay when they sell a home. Well, now that's not in there anymore. So we don't know if the seller is open to paying a commission or not. We have to get a buyer's agreement with you, and that buyer's agreement could be anywhere from 0 to X, whatever X is. So I'm not sure how many buyer's agents are going to work for 0. I mean, I guess I would ask you, would you work for 0 at your job? I'm pretty sure you wouldn't. So there's a lot of moving water in that right now. So the answer right now is buyer or seller can pay it. We're working through it. Now, here's one that somebody sent me that was pretty detailed to their situation, but I have received this often. Does anyone in Florida even take a house sale contingency? Now, that's going to vary county to county. If you're in a primary home market, it is a lot more common for a seller to take a house sale contingency. So Naples, Boca Raton, Sarasota, Marco Island, Anna Maria Island, these places that are considered second home markets, vacation home markets, it's going to be a lot more difficult for you to get a house sale contingency. And why is that? Well, the reason is people don't want to wait. They don't know your market. So let's say you're coming out of St. Louis. You're going to move from St. Louis to Naples. And in St. Louis, let's just say that the market is slow. The market is not, there's not a lot of buyers in the market right now because it is a primary home market and the interest rates are high. A lot of families in that community. So if it takes 6 months for that particular house to sell, then you as the seller of the property in Naples are just sitting tight. You can't do anything because you're under contract with these folks to make that happen. Is there a good time to buy in coastal Florida? So I'm going to take this as up and down the East Coast and the West Coast of Florida. So the answer generally, if you are in more of the southern part of Florida, so let's say south of St. Augustine, and let's say south of Tampa. So where it's really warm, the climate is really warm year round, the best time to buy in those areas is going to be the summer. So it's so blistering hot in Florida, especially now. It's so hot that many people that are from up north, they're in their home states because they want to enjoy their summer in New York, or their summer in Boston, or their summer in Michigan. They enjoy it in their home state, their hometown, during that time of the year. And then when it gets cold where they live year round, they want to come south. So the best time to buy in these coastal areas is going to be in the hot summer months, because we have less people in Florida at this time. So you have more motivated sellers and less competition. When is high season in Florida? So again, we're going to speak to those same areas up and down the coast that I just mentioned. Think about it this way. Generally speaking, the beginning of season is going to be right around Thanksgiving. So right in that time frame, October, November begins season, and then season ends right around Easter. So usually April. That time is our high season. So again, if it's cold where you live, then it's probably our high season. So think Thanksgiving to Easter. And along with that same question, are prices higher during season? Do the prices drop in the summer? I think we just went over that. Yes, they tend to drop in the summer. Yes, they go up in season. I have watched people do it, maybe sit all summer long, get no activity whatsoever, and then raise their price by $50,000 in season. Now, you might be coming down from Michigan or Boston, and when I tell you the history of that property, you're like, wait, what? Why would they do that? They didn't sell in the summer, and now they want $50,000 more in the winter? Yeah, people do that. And guess what? A lot of times they do still sell. Because why? Because there are more people coming in. And listen, not every real estate agent is going to walk through that history with you. A good one will. You should know that. That's important to know. Because listen, if Joe Smith was willing to take $500,000 in September, but in November, Joe Smith wants $550,000? No. And we need to know that. Is red tide real? I hear about that all the time. It's scaring me. Do people really wind up in the hospital? Yeah, first of all, it is real. And red tide, a lot of people think that red tide is red, and it isn't. It's actually kind of lime green. So what it is theoretically is way up north, Okeechobee, Lake Okeechobee, they have these sugar plants that release these chemicals into the water. And what happens is the chemicals come down through into the Gulf, and when they make their way through the warm water, this bacteria forms red tide. Listen, I'm a real estate broker. I am not a scientist. If somebody is out there typing right now to tell me that the chemical compound does not create the... Listen, I'm just telling you what I know. I'm just giving you the layman's terms. That is basically what happens. So as it moves down through and it sits in the waterways, it tends to collect like in the canals. For example, Cape Coral has a problem with it all the time. It will sit in those kind of slow-moving canals that don't have running water, and it will collect in the canal, especially if you're at the end of the canal, and you can have dead fish. It kills the fish. It kills the wildlife. There was one year, it was year before last, we had dead fish literally all over the beaches. That is a real thing. Now, personally, myself, I have sort of a tad bit of asthma. So when I go to the beach during the time of months that you can have red tide, there's times when you can have it and times when you can't. So generally speaking, in the summer months, that's where you tend to see it during that time period. So what I always do is I will look on the website, and you can look on any Collier County, Manatee County, Lee County. You can look them all up and see where the red tide is, because it moves and it floats. And then you might, let's say you were planning to go to Bonita Beach for the day, but then you look that up on the website and it says there's a high presence of red tide. Then you might decide to go elsewhere, go to a different beach that isn't showing that high presence. Now, in the instance that I have forgotten to do that, I immediately know. If I I immediately know. I will be in the parking lot and start coughing. In fact, a lot of times you'll get out of your car, and if other people are in the parking lot, they may be coughing. It hits you in the throat right away, and you really can taste it. It's almost like acidic. You can't necessarily see it on the beach at all. So, like I said, sometimes you see that lime green blooms, they call it, but really your first sign is it will catch you in the throat. All right, we're going to do one more, and if you have any questions, please leave them down below in comments, and we will do another one of these, because if you find them helpful, and I hear all the time that you do, then drop your questions in there. I'll move them aside, and we'll do another Q&A coming up in the next several weeks. So the last one is, and this is a weird one, but I get this question all the time: are there really snakes and gators all over the place? And that's usually how people word it, is in their mind, if they've heard of one snake incident or one gator incident, they kind of see it as everywhere. And I would say this: in the Everglades, where you probably aren't going to be very often unless you're doing an airboat tour. So unless you're in the Everglades, there are not a lot of snakes. There are snakes for sure. There are snakes you need to be aware of, like your venomous snakes, your coral snake. You will see them from time to time. Not all that often, really depending on where you live. If you live in like somewhere like Golden Gate Estates, where it's rural, you're going to see snakes for sure. If you live in an area where they're developing around your area. So there were a couple spots in North Naples that there was a lot of new construction going on. Well, that wildlife lives there, and it's basically being evicted, and it could wind up in your neighborhood. So do you see pythons all over the road? No. I personally, in the over 20 years that I've been in Florida, I have never seen a python out like in the normal living world. Never. Now, other kinds of snakes, I see black snakes maybe once a month. I don't go walking through the grass because I get bit by bugs all the time, but I've seen black snakes from time to time, and they don't bother anybody. I've never seen a venomous snake, ever. So do they live in Florida? Yes, they absolutely do, but they're really not hanging out in the more populated city areas. Now again, they are there, but you don't see them all over all the time. And like I said, I've never seen a venomous snake. Now, alligators, on the other hand, I see 2 to 3 times a week. And where I see them is always in the ponds. So those little retention ponds, you know what I'm talking about. They're behind houses. I see alligators in those all the time. When I'm driving up and down in Immokalee in North Naples, I see alligators every single time that I'm driving up and down that road. I see them all the time in North Naples just sunning themselves. So, and sometimes they're huge. Like I'm talking about, if I'm guessing, maybe a 10-foot, 12-foot gator. They are out there. I can think of a couple Gulf communities where I've seen some of the biggest prehistoric looking gators. So you just have to really be aware. Do not go by those little ponds. Do not. It's dangerous to do it. If you see a gator, just leave it alone. That's what I would suggest. I hope you enjoyed these questions and answers. If you have any for yourself, please either book a little time with me or ask it down below, and we'll answer for everyone here in the Connect to Florida community.